everyone. My name is Athena Buxton, and I'm the Education Coordinator for the Hunter Museum of American Art. And I will be going over how to make your own papier-mâché mask using some stuff you might have in your house. So the first step to making a papier-mâché mask is choosing a base. So there's two ways you can do this. You can either use a balloon like I'll be using today, or you can use a bowl. Now, if you are going to be using a bowl, I would highly recommend either spraying your bowl with non-stick spray or rubbing it down with some oil, or maybe covering it with plastic wrap, mostly because, especially with ceramic and metal bowls, papier-mâché really likes to stick to them. And if you want to reuse that bowl in the future, I would highly recommend putting something on it to protect it. Otherwise, if you're using a balloon like I'm going to be using today, your papier-mâché shouldn't stick to it, and you can very easily take it off, so there's no need to cover it with everything. And to sort of give you an example of the types of masks we're going to be learning how to make today, this is one I made earlier, so this is something you can do. You can also go much farther than this, not just make your own masks. Since everything we're going to be going over today, all the steps can be applied to making pretty much anything. So if you want to make a papier-mâché sculpture or make a papier-mâché piñata, you can take everything we learned and just apply it towards that. So now that I have my base, I'm going with the balloon. I'm going to place my balloon in a bowl. That's just going to keep it from moving around while I do this. You can also alternatively tape it to your surface, especially if you're doing this with small kids. I would recommend taping it down so the balloon doesn't go bouncing all over the table and move around. And as for the paste we're going to be using today, I'm using probably the most inexpensive, easily attainable papier-mâché paste you can use, which is just a mixture of flour and water. And I did about 1 cup of flour to 2 cups of water. That's about the ratio you need, 1 part flour to 2 part water. And as for my balloon here, I just blew it up to about the size of my head. I have a large head, so I went for a pretty large balloon. You can blow it up a little bit smaller. Bowls are especially good if you're making one for kids, since they tend to be a little bit smaller than the balloon. And as for the paste, you really want the paste to be about the consistency of glue or a thick soup. I find that works the best. You can always thin it out a little bit more if you're more comfortable with that. I prefer it to be a little bit thicker. So to get started, I have my balloon. I already pre-cut up some strips of newspaper. You don't have to cut your newspaper into beautiful, even strips. You can just tear the newspaper as you go. I just pre-cut it for ease. And you want a variety of sizes. The smaller the strip of newspaper it is, the easier it is to sort of put on a curved surface. So if you are going to be working with a balloon or a bowl, don't do anything larger. Strips larger than about 5 or 6 inches are usually too wieldy to work with. And to get started, I'm just going to dip my newspaper strip in my paste, and then I'm taking 2 fingers and carefully removing all the excess from, and it's pretty well soaked now, and then I'll start laying it on top of my balloon. Now, if you're making a mask, you can always take a Sharpie before you start doing this and draw your design on the balloon to figure out where you need to put the papier-mâché. I like to just do it by feel and see how it goes. And if things end up a little lopsided in the end, I just think that's more fun. But if you want to make sure everything is even and you want to know where your eye holes are going to be and where your mouth hole is going to be and the edges of your mask, you can just go ahead and draw it down with a Sharpie. Now, as I'm going around, this is going to eventually be the hole for one of my eyes. I am crossing the newspaper over each other. So I'm going horizontally, then vertically, and that's going to help it hold together. If you go through and just lay the strips all in the same direction with very little overlap, your papier-mâché is probably going to fall apart. You really want to make sure that you're going in different directions. It just helps it hold a little bit better. And I'm going to keep doing this till I get about a nice even layer about the size that I want my mask to be. And it's okay if as you're doing this mask, you accidentally cover one of your eye holes or you make the mask a little too big. When you're done, you can always take scissors and cut off the excess or remove any parts that are unwanted. And most of the time when you're done with your paper mache and it's had time to dry, you usually want to trim the edges just to make it a little bit smoother and nicer looking. Now this is a really great activity. I know for many parents, summer break has started and you're looking for things to do with your young kids. This is a fun activity for them, and it takes them a couple days and a few hours each day to complete. So if you need something for them to do for about an entire week's worth of activities, you can give them a balloon and some newspaper and some paste and have them work towards making their own mask or even making their own piñata or creature. And as you're doing this, and this gets a little bit heavier, the balloon might start shifting a little bit from the weight. As long as most of the paper mache is sort of sitting on the top, it should stay in place. Now I'm just going through. And if you do plan to sort of break this up over several days to make your paper mache mask, I would highly recommend adding a few tablespoons of salt to your paper mache paste. That's going to help it keep, because we're using just flour and water, which likes to ferment if you leave it at room temperature for too long. Putting the salt keeps it from spoiling. You can also put it in your fridge. It will hold quite well. There's no real danger of it growing anything dangerous. It just starts to smell very yeasty after a few days if there's no salt in it. So please save the paste and add the salt to it if you want to use it for a few more days. So I'm just going through. I now have about the layer for a mask, 2 eyes, and now I want to add a nose. So for this mask here, I was able to add a little bit more mask to the side. So you have a nose, you have eyebrows, eyelids, and there's 2 ways you can sort of do that. You can either take a few strips of newspaper instead of just 1 strip at a time like I did with the others. Take a few strips till it's pretty thick, fold it in half, submerge it in your paste, and then place it onto your balloon where you want it to be, your nose, and then take more strips, also paste, and then go over them so it stays in place. And if you do that over and over again, eventually it will build up to form facial features like a nose. Alternatively, another way you can do this, and this is probably quicker than doing it that way, is before you even start putting paper mache on your balloon, you can take sheets of newspaper, and I already did one here as an example, crumple it up, put it on your balloon where you want to be. So this is a cheek, I want another round cheek, and then just take Scotch tape and tape it down. And if you do this method, you want to make sure that the newspaper is completely covered by Scotch tape. That's because paper mache does not stick to Scotch tape, just like it doesn't stick to the balloon. So when it dries and you're getting ready to take this off the balloon, you can very easily remove it. If any of this is uncovered, is not covered by tape, it's going to stick and it's going to be a lot more painful to get out. So you want to make sure that's covered with tape. And same thing if you wanted to add a nose, just crumple up a little newspaper for the nose, put it between my cheeks, tape them down, and then once I had all my facial features built out and I was happy with them, maybe I shape them a little bit more with my hand, I would then cover all of this with strips of newspaper that have been covered in paste. Now, once you've completely finished making your mask, you have the design you want, you've built up all your features, the fun part comes. You get to leave it to dry, and then after it's completely dry, you pop the balloon and it pulls right out. You shouldn't have any problem taking it out. It shouldn't tear as long as there was nothing on it that it could stick to. If you're using a bowl that you did not spray down with cooking spray or put some sort of a protective barrier, it might be a little bit harder to wiggle out. But if you're using a balloon or you've properly sprayed down your bowl, then it should pop right out once it's dry. While it's wet, it will stay pretty much until you pop the balloon. And you want to make sure it's completely dry before you do that. If it's still wet, it's very malleable and you can very easily end up forming it in a different way, or it might come a little bent or crooked. So you want to make sure that it's completely dry before you pull it off. And then, of course, when you're finished working on this and you want to leave it to dry, make sure you leave it in a nice warm place. If you leave it in a very humid, cold environment, the paper mache will spoil and you'll start to notice a very yeast-like smell because this is done with flour. But otherwise, as long as this gets to dry pretty quickly and you added salt to your paste, it should be no issues pulling it out. And then you can do what I did afterwards. I waited till mine dried, I pulled it off the balloon, and then I painted mine, and then I went in with little strips of newspaper, which I cut and then glued on to make sort of hair for my little mask over here. And this works. You don't have to just make a human-like mask. You can make an animal mask. So maybe you want to make a mask shaped like a cat or a bunny. Pretty much same principle going through. Or even if you were to go and make sort of an animal-shaped piñata, that's a fun one I've done with kids and they really enjoy doing. You could just make sure you cover the entire balloon with paper mache besides a little small circle at the end, and then when you pop it, you just pull the balloon out through that small shape. And then once it dries, you can cover it with paint or little strips of colored paper and it would make a pretty fun piñata. You can fill it with things and then have the fun of getting to bust it open or keep it on your shelf. It's like a beautiful sculpture you've made. And that is how you make your paper mache masks. Now you want to do a couple layers for this. I would probably do 2 or 3 just to ensure that it's nice and strong. One layer is, if you just do 1 layer of newsprint, it's not going to be sturdy enough to support itself. For this one that I made here, I used about 3 layers of newspaper and paste before I was happy with it. That's usually a good rule of thumb, is 2 or 3. The more layers you add, the longer it's going to take to dry. So after 2 or 3 layers, it usually will take 2 to 3 days to dry. And that can be a bit of a hassle. So 2 or 3 is usually good. And I want to thank everyone for joining today. I hope you go home and make your own paper mache masks or paper mache sculptures. And I would love to see it if you share it back or send us an image of it. Thank you so much.